Margaret had tried in vain for the 5th time to reach the nanny. She urgently needed to go to work again, and there was no one to leave her daughter with. Margaret's daughter was 8 years old and named Jane. She always liked staying with the nanny, which suited Margaret just fine. The business was thriving, but there was no time left for family. Even in the rare moments when Margaret was at home, her daughter often spent time alone. During this time, Margaret liked to relax on the couch with a glass of wine. Since moving into the new house, Margaret had already changed the 6th nanny in half a year. They just stopped answering the phone. Margaret couldn't understand what was happening. She always paid on time and never heard any complaints from the girls who came to work as nannies. After calling the agency and finally finding a new nanny, she leaned back in her chair with a sigh and somehow remembered how many years ago her mother, the first owner of this house, disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Margaret dozed off without realizing it, and the doorbell woke her up. It was a courier delivering food. He carried the heavy bags into the house. Margaret tipped him, but then the courier suddenly stared at something upstairs. Fear reflected on his face. Not taking the tip, he quickly left. Margaret also looked up and, not seeing anything unusual, sat back on the couch. Her thoughts returned to the former owner of the house. She had practically no contact with her mother. Rumors had it that she hadn't left the house in over 10 years. Neighbors thought she was strange and didn't communicate with her. Sometimes they noticed her watching the street from the window of the house. Then she disappeared. According to the neighbors, strange noises often came from the house. Sometimes lights would turn on, and shadows would flicker in the windows. After some time, Margaret decided to move into her mother's house. It was a luxurious mansion in a good area. She was awakened again by the doorbell. It was the new nanny. Margaret showed her the house, introduced her to her daughter, and quickly left the house, as she was already very late. The nanny's name was Karen. She was a pleasant young woman. Jane liked her immediately. She took Jane's hand and led her to show her room. As they passed by the cat, he was looking up, completely ignoring the new person in the house. Karen looked up but saw nothing. At that moment, the cat hissed loudly and ran out of the room. Jane laughed cheerfully and told her not to pay attention to the cat. He often behaved strangely. They finally reached the children's room, sat on the carpet, and Jane began to show her toys. They had a good time, but Karen couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She turned around sharply but saw no one. The cat hissed again in the next room. A chill ran down Karen's spine. Jane continued to play cheerfully as if nothing had happened, and Karen calmed down a bit. Suddenly, Jane asked if Karen knew how to dance. Karen was a bit taken aback by the question but said yes, she danced well. Jane asked Karen to dance for her. The request seemed strange to Karen, and she refused, but Jane kept insisting until Karen agreed. Jane turned on a strange melody on the audio system. Karen started to dance. Meanwhile, Jane climbed into the closet, slightly closed the door, and watched Karen dance. Everything about it seemed extremely strange to Karen. She felt again that someone was watching her. Jane laughed loudly, and Karen continued dancing through clenched teeth. Now she distinctly felt that someone was behind her. She felt the room getting much colder. At that moment, Jane loudly slammed the closet doors from the inside. Fear paralyzed Karen. She stood frozen, wanting to run but unable to move. Then she realized she needed to look not behind but up. At that moment, her feet lifted off the ground. The music she had been dancing to abruptly stopped. Margaret returned late. Jane was already asleep in her bed. The new nanny was nowhere to be found. Margaret cursed about it. She had no energy left after the long day. She poured herself a glass of wine, leaned back on the couch, and fell asleep. She dreamed of an old woman peering into the darkness of the night from the window of her mansion.
Hello everyone. As always, this is Mushroom News. We'll tell you about all the main events of the hour. Today marks exactly 1 year since the most fateful discovery in human history. Let's take another look at how it happened.